Minions, I've returned from the brink of death. Well, figuratively not. That's not actually what happened. I kind of just forgot to put out new videos, but we're gonna go with that. That's the lore. I was dying. I was in the clutches of a dragon's claw, and I miraculously escaped. So you know when you and all of your relatives get together, there's always that one dude or dudette that brings up politics? Now imagine that at your D&D table, happening with half of the players there. Rule 1, don't talk about politics at your table. But I digress. That is the scenario for today's story. And oh man, do these two players not let it go. With that teaser, let's roll for initiative and begin today's story. I've been playing and DMing long enough to have been a horror story myself many times, before finally coming into my own as a DM. I'm in my 40s and have been role-playing/DMing in various games since I was 20, and these two brother extremist incels have been in almost every one of my games. I call them incels because they refuse to play with women players, always degrade women NPCs in-game, and only the oldest has even had a girlfriend. The oldest is in his 40s, youngest is upper 30s. Younger is unemployed, and elder has a job he works about 20 to 30 hours a week for. They live with my friend's mom, because their saint of a mother passed away, and was no longer able to wait on them hand and foot. I'll call the older brother Turd, and the younger brother Duke. I'm DM. Good friend number 1 is Mage, and good friend number 2 is Monk. This happened in a game we all enjoyed called Exalted. We had the 2nd edition books. It was originally created by White Wolf, the makers of Vampire the Masquerade and its spin-offs. Neither Turd nor Duke had played in one before, and Turd had been wanting to enjoy it. Duke didn't seem so enthused, but because Turd was his brother, he went along with it. Mage, Monk, and I had been looking forward to playing it for some time, as it was an anime fantasy game with high-powered abilities. Turd had been a serious problem in the past, and the 3 of us were literally the only people, out of a pool of roughly 8, who would play with him due to his rigid, self-righteous approach to gaming, the same approach he took to life. He's been kicked from every Roll20 group as well as every pickup Discord group he's joined. We only played with him because we had history with him, and we wanted to include him because we knew it was important social time for him. Duke was trying very hard to be the same as his older brother. Anytime we tried to bring in a 5th player from our pool of gaming friends, they would ask if Turd or Duke were playing, and if they were, the hopeful 5th would decline. 4 players and 1 DM would have to do. Why were they so hard to get along with, you ask? I think this sums it up. We are on a session 0, getting to know the world and getting backstories set. I have created a conglomerate of city-states called the Union of Kagoma, a hero from the timeline of the Exalted campaign I built. Turd was so upset with the name that he began berating me for choosing that title. His right-wing fundamentalist background was insulted. He chose a sniper archer, his go-to class and specialist tree, who was secretly about the destruction of the Union. When asked why, he simply told me I should already know. He's a Union buster. Okay, no worries. I could play with that, and it would make a good story down the line, a bit. Duke then declared his character felt the same way. Sure, no problem, let's roll with it. On to the stats and character building. In White Wolf, one can make flaws to gain extra character creation points. Because of this, I limited the amount of flaws they could take to 10 points. If I hadn't, they, Turd and Duke, would have loaded up on food restrictions so they could buy all the insane powers they wanted at the beginning of the game. I'm a fan of growing into characters who have massive powers, not starting with massive powers. Mage and Monk both play as characters who think the Union is great and has brought peace to an otherwise war-torn area. Turd and Duke immediately start berating the other players for their choices, saying that the Union was all about controlling your actions and forcing you to accept their way and pay their taxes so they can take it all for themselves. I calm the 2 incels down and ask Duke what his backstory is and why he hates the Union. He tells me his character has total amnesia and doesn't remember. He just hates them. He took the maximum amnesia flaw so he could buy a power he wanted. I ask how he even knew about the Union if he had total amnesia, and he said the Union soldiers had found him and had taken him in and trained him to be their weapon. He, too, was a sniper archer. I asked him why he would hate the very nation that might have saved his life. He said it was up to me. He just knew he couldn't stand hearing the name. As we ended session 0, we looked on the group. Mage and Monk both had a few reasonable flaws for their characters. Mage was an OCD with his spells and materials. Monk was a vegan and had a serious code he had to follow or risk losing a god's blessing and the powers said god granted. While Turd and Doc had flaws that seemed to be nothing more than a way to buy powers. Okay, no problem. Turd's character was missing a finger, a toe, an ear, couldn't read, and had a hard time with his temper. Duke had total amnesia, didn't write a name down as he had forgotten it in character. Couldn't eat a specific type of meat or a specific type of vegetable, and I had forgotten why. Session 1 is about to begin. I arrived a little early to gather my notes and get prepared for the game. Duke and Turd were already at Mage's house, where we played, when I got there. As I was getting ready, they both began to argue with me over the name of the Union. They wanted me to change it because they had an out-of-character problem with it and would not be able to enjoy the game if it remained. I asked them what would be a better name. They said Kingdom, United States, the Collective, anything but Union. I told them I would be calling the place the UK for short if that helped. They said it was worse. I asked them why it was such a problem to play in a fictitious land with a fictitious country called the Union. Honestly, I would have been fine changing the name, but I wanted to know why it was so bad. They told me I should know that it was because unions have destroyed our economy, have ruined our jobs, have taken advantage of hardworking folks, and have taken money out of people's paychecks for dues that accomplish nothing for the workers and only put money in the hands of the union leaders. We got into an argument about how the word union was used in the game I made, and how by using it as a name of the country of origin triggered them. By this time, Monk, who had arrived mid-explanation by Turd and Duke, and the Mage, were both in on the argument, and asked why I should have to change the name simply because they couldn't help bringing their personal politics to the game. Mage and Monk were fine with the name, they said, and Turd and Duke needed to get over themselves. Both Mage and Monk were tired of how Turd and Duke would argue every point to get their way, and that I shouldn't have to change a harmless name because it triggered their political brains to begin arguing. This conversation/argument lasted 3 of the 5 hours we had allotted for the game. By the time we got close to starting the game, both Turd and Duke determined that they were unhappy, but they were fine with continuing anyway. Mage and Monk spoke up. They said that they were not going to play if Turd and Duke couldn't keep their personal politics out of the game. Turd and Duke laid the blame at my feet for not being flexible enough to change the name from Union to something else. The argument continued. Mage, Monk, and myself were trying to get them to accept that this union was different from a labor union, while Turd and Duke claimed that just by the nature of the word union, it was the same thing. Mage and Monk argued about all the other times union has been used, including on the winning side of the American Civil War. Finally, the 5 hours finished, and we had done nothing but argue. Turd and Duke insisted that they wanted to play the game, but Monk, Mage, and I had heard enough, and we ended the whole thing then and there. We decided to play elsewhere, booted Turd and Duke from the group, and promptly had 4 more people willing to join now that Turd and Duke were no longer playing. After years of playing with Turd and Duke, it was refreshing to not have someone spend half an hour arguing that I had no idea how to DM whenever I told them they couldn't do something that they thought they should be able to do. It was even better not having people argue over politics for the first hour of every game session too. End post. Okay, just to curb any sort of flame war in the comments, I'm not going to discuss unions outside of me saying I'm not going to discuss unions. I will, however, discuss the two players in question, whom the OP addresses as incels. I'm instead going to call them man-childs. Because while I'm sure they demonstrated incel-like behavior based on earlier comments in the story, everything in the story in question gears them a bit more towards being man-childs. And frankly, there's actually not a lot to say here. Their whole interactions themselves were ridiculous. They were very clearly trying to power game the system. Based on the OP's comments, they were misogynistic and they were argumentative. Frankly, I don't know how they were with OP for nearly 20 years before getting them kicked out. They would not have lasted more than about a session with me. And yeah, really, the only lesson to learn here is don't be like them. Chances are if you find yourself constantly arguing with everyone, you are probably the problem. And therefore my feedback is mostly to the OP. Have a little bit more self-respect. You had something like 5 to 6 other players that refused to play with these guys. Take the hint. Nobody wanted to play with them for a reason. And I get the feeling sympathetic part about it. Their mother passed, they have clearly not lived fantastic lives. You're sympathetic, I understand. But sometimes the only way someone can learn is by falling to the absolute lowest point in their life. And unfortunately, if you needed to be the one who did it to them by removing them from the game, so be it. Anyhow, that is it for today's story. I do want to apologize for the audio quality. I've had to disassemble my recording booth, so I'm in a very acoustically untreated space. I'm trying to make the best of it, but I know the audio quality definitely suffered as a result. It's just going to take me a little bit of time to fine-tune the audio settings. Now, if you're not already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell notification icon to be notified of my future videos. And why not check out my podcast? Short Tales of RPG Horror can be found in pretty much any of the mainstream apps. And I've also linked it in the description in case you want to get it there. Now, while you wait for my future videos, here are a few related videos that you can watch from my channel in the meantime.